I want to talk about the 6 C's of this class of writing short nonfiction pieces or essays. Now, these are my terms, and or my this is my sort of thing, um, and it's an easy way for me to remember some key concepts that I teach, that I practice, that sort of thing. And so I offer to you this sort of thing, and I call it the 6 C's. There's 6 words I want you to remember, and each word begins with the letter C. So 6 C's. And if I can think of a seventh one, then I've got the 7 C's. Maybe that'll be a little better way to think of it. But I don't want to stretch things. I don't want to come up with a fake one. But anyway, some of these are kind of obvious, but some we should talk about, and some will warrant a separate video altogether. So the first C is content. Okay, I want you to be able to get content for your topic. So that's kind of a no-brainer. But when it comes to research, it doesn't just come out of your head like maybe a philosophical essay would, or a memoir piece, or a short story, or whatnot. You have to go out and see what's out there in terms of facts, in terms of literature pieces on this, in terms of all the sorts of presentations people can create and produce concerning a topic. Movies, documentaries, video clips like YouTube clips, websites, podcasts, audiobooks, books themselves, magazines, newspapers, academic journals, and that's just a material that is in a fixed format and documentable. I mean, what about face-to-face interviews? What about anecdotes, which are material that people bring to the table in terms of personal experience, but they don't know for sure if this relates to other people, and so you can't really use it as proof, but it could be a great example. It could be a great opener, a great closer. It could add a personal touch. Many of you might be interested in a topic because of a personal experience you've had in that area. So that would be anecdotal, but that's content. You're going out there and you're trying to deal with content, trying to get it in you. And if you have great library services and you really take this seriously, you might realize that there's a lot of content out there, and the question is, how do you get through that? And that's a great question, and you need to develop reading strategies and listening strategies, like doing audiobooks when possible in certain places. Instead of reading the book, maybe reading the book review, so being able to find book reviews online or in databases. If you get a book, just realizing it's really only like the 5th chapter that you need to read. Things like that. That would be section reading, versus skim reading, versus skip reading, versus speed reading. So you can tell I have strategies. The purpose of this video is not to discuss those strategies. That's coming later, but content. All right, you're going to have to dedicate time to that and thinking to that. All right, so that's the first C. The next C is conversation. Okay. And once you pick a topic and you narrow it down, your job then is to try to find what other people are writing about concerning that topic. So this might, it's not about knowing what you're going to say yet, and then trying to find support for that. It's just you've got a focused topic, and now you need to just understand the conversation that's out there. Okay, and I'm going to have a separate video for this as well. Because this is a very important concept here, but you need to just be able to read the major sources from the major authors or content creators of this topic. So what I mean is, it could be a very important documentary, or it could be an important journal article, or it could be an important book that you need to know. And you get the sense that these are important because as you read something, you realize they keep on, they refer to that book, and then you're reading something else and they refer to that same book. So, there's an intertextual conversation happening. Authors are referring to other books, and sometimes you get to see some sources that are very important that keep on getting referred to. Those definitely you need to know. And then, you just need to basically know everything that has been written on your specific area. So obviously, if you pick something like mental health, and you know, how do you know everything that's just way too big, so it's good to get started on that, but then you got to really be able to focus very quickly on something. Okay, so maybe you might want to portray, uh, you might want to examine how mental breakdowns are portrayed in movies. You see how now I've got something very specific. And so definitely, getting the content ideas, I've got to watch those movies to see, I've got to find a selection to see what that breakdown looks like. But then I need to go ahead and try to find if there's a conversation happening about how Hollywood treats mental illness. Now at that point, the conversation is a bit wider because I'm not just looking at mental breakdown. Maybe I'm looking at an eating disorder or something else. I'm just trying to find what people have written, and if I realize they're writing about this and they're writing about this and they're writing about this when it comes to mental health and Hollywood representation in mainstream movies, there's a gap here, and because they're not writing about this, I'm going to focus on that. But you need to know what the conversation is, what they're talking about, so that you can understand how to make a contribution. That's the third C. Okay, so it's content, which helps you understand what the conversation is about your topic, and then once you understand that, you can make a contribution. Okay, now a contribution is basically where you say, I know how the people at this conversation table, this dinner table, if you will, how they're talking to each other concerning this topic, but they're overlooking something, or there's a question nobody's asking, or there's a word that we're misusing, and we think we know what it means, but I'm pretty sure we're actually confused about what this one word means, or somebody's mentioning a study, but in fact that study is 20 years old and maybe done in a foreign country. How do we know it relates to today's American culture? So you can enter a conversation through certain ways, and that's your contribution. And in fact, you are experts at conversation. You've been having them ever since you've been 3 or 4 years old, sometimes even 2 years old, right? Maybe even 1.5. You've certainly been listening to them longer than that. So you know what things work in a conversation. You can't just sit down at a table where a conversation is happening and never speak. I mean, yes, you can, right? But you don't produce a text, so you know that's fine. You can just sit and listen. But for a class like this, I'm going to ask you to speak in terms of writing a paper or something like that. So, um, you don't have that as a live option, but you also know that you can't just sit down, right? And then whoever's to your left, whatever they say, you can't just say that right after. You can't just copy it like a parrot. You know what I'm saying? Or if 3, 4 people are saying something, you can't just say, okay, my turn. Here's what I'm going to say, and then you just summarize what they're saying, and then that's it. They'll be like, what are you adding? We already said that. We don't need you to summarize what we just said. You see what I'm saying? So you know how a contribution works, and sometimes it takes the form of a question nobody's asking. You can literally write a paper that introduces a question, and that's all it does. You don't even have to answer the question, as long as you can show me that no one is asking that question and that question needs to be asked. Or you can write a definition paper as your research paper, where you show me how people are using the term in their writing, but in fact it's a very loose term still, and no one is anchoring it down. For example, there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not computers can think. And that word is actually a very loose word in that conversation that's happening, that published conversation. And I know I could enter that conversation just challenging the way that word is being used. All it would be a definition paper, but I would have to quote sources to show how they're using it, and then I would have to bring in my logic and my definition. You see, that's how that contribution would work. So if you realize there's a study that's old, and you actually can do that same study now, and bring it up to date, that's a contribution. You see how people in that table would be thankful for that data. But you might, so that's the data-driven approach for a contribution. But you as a student might say, well, I can't do that. I can't go run that study in any professional or respectable way. Okay, that's fine. Can you write a proposal that someone redo the study? Can you just tell them, this is why I think it needs to be done. This is how I think it needs to be done. Why I think it needs to be done. How it needs to be done. But I have limited funds, limited time, limited resources. So I'm calling for someone who can do this, to do it. It's a proposal paper. And then you don't even have to run the research. I mean, the study. You see what I'm saying? That would work because that's a contribution to the conversation. All right. So far we have 3 C's: content, right? Conversation, contribution. All right. So the next thing you have to do is you have to think in terms of how you are going to present your contribution. Sometimes you can just speak it, like if you're at a conference or a presentation. Sometimes you can put it together as a visual element. For example, a video, a documentary. Sometimes you're hired to do that. You know, if you have that skill, you can do that. Do it that way. Sometimes you are, in fact, asked to write an essay about this, right? And I'm just thinking in terms of your professional career, you might be asked to write it up, write it up. And at that point, you're going to have to write an essay, that explains your idea, your contribution. So you need to be with the 4th C here. That's creativity. Now, the 4th C kind of toggles, right? Because you can have creativity in how you present it, but you can actually also have creativity as to how you produce your contribution. And so there is a lot of creativity here in terms of learning the right question, being able to recognize the right angle to come at a topic, and which to come at a topic, and being creative in terms of coming up with a new approach, a new interpretation. That is tough. That's tough. Being creative in terms of how to create interest, maintain it, reward it. Creativity in terms of how you're going to form your title, how you're going to start your paper, So creativity can apply to a substance level of a text. That's like what's actually being said, what's going on down there in the communication level, the substance of it, how you develop that, how you found that angle, how you found that way to contribute. And I'm going to help you think through the creativity aspect with argumentative techniques later in this class. But creativity can also be applied to how you are actually doing the surface level of a text. So, a text is going to always have at least 2 levels. One is the surface level, one then is the substance level. So the surface level I'm talking about here is, yes, to some extent the grammar, the punctuation, the mechanics, but it's also the style. It's also, if things like, are you including pictures? What are you doing with your words to keep the reader on track with you, to maintain the interest. And sometimes creativity can be a positive thing where you're adding stuff that legitimately helps the reader stay on top with what you're saying, or it could be a decision to change the font. Again, I'm going a little off track here because you're not really making these decisions at the college level, but I can't tell you how many books are rendered unreadable because the printer decided to save ink by using a very fine font, and it quickly fades, and it's just okay. So there should have been more imagination and a better decision made there. But I've kind of strayed quite a bit here. But creativity is the 4th C. All right, it's going to help you figure out how to make contributions. It's going to help you figure out how to present it in a certain way that's going to create interest, maintain it, and reward it. Okay, so 4 C's so far, correct? Content, conversation, contribution, creativity, okay? And then the 5th C and the 6th C, the 5th C and the 6th C, here we go, are a composition and convention, okay? So composition kind of goes with creativity because when I talk about composition, even though that is a very broad word, in fact, it's probably in the title of this class in terms of how it's listed in the schedule of classes or whatnot, but composition just literally means putting the pieces together, how you arrange pieces in relation with each other. How many sections is your paper going to have? And within those sections, how many paragraphs? Will this one have 1 paragraph and the next section have 3? Depends what you need to do with that. But I would like you to have a plan in terms of just the basic sections of your paper. And so composition is where are you going to place that anecdote? Where are you going to place that stunning statistic that's going to stick in the memory of your reader? Are you going to close with that? Are you going to open with it? What are you going to do with that source that's kind of weak, or that idea you had that kind of supports your point but not really? Are you going to bury it in the middle? Are you going to add it on to something else? Composition, okay? And then convention is the last C, and I bring that to the table because I want you to realize that you're writing to a certain audience, and you have to be able to determine the rules that the audience has already set. Okay. Um, so if you are, for example, writing for a college class, and the professor is very strict or very concerned about spacing and font type and font size, and if they actually give you a plan as to how to open, and that is convention. Now, if you are citing sources, right, and they tell you you need to use the rules or the format from a certain organization like the American Psychological Association, APA, or the Chicago Manual of Style, the CMS, right, Chicago Manual, or if you need to use MLA, Modern Language Association rules, the rules for where to put your page number, for how to do the in-text citation and the parenthetical citation, how to title your reference page, works cited, how to alphabetize it, how to do underhanging indentation. Really, why? Why do we have to do it that way? No, that's a very good question, and that answer could probably make a great research paper. But you shouldn't really enter that debate while you're in the class under the tutelage of a professor that wants to do it a certain way and doesn't. If they don't really give the impression that they're open to change, just you got to roll with that. And if they're asking you to do it in MLA, that's the convention they want it. A convention is structured upon agreement. I mean, literally, people agreed on how to do this. There were probably some people that didn't want it done that way, but when the votes were taken and the manual was written on that editorial board, they just went. It was done by consensus. It was done by agreement. There's not really a lot of logic behind it. I mean, sure, there's a reason for why they're doing everything, but another organization might have another reason why they want it done differently, right? So there's sort of a insular logic to it, but there's no absolute logic to it. It's just a rule somebody came up with, and they want their title capitalized this way, and the other group wants it capitalized a different way. I mean, are you really going to get any traction or get anywhere if you refuse to follow the rules on principle? I mean, you can follow your principle, but you're probably never going to get published. I know this is just a basic writing class, and we're not even really thinking about publishing, but it is kind of a helpful thought experiment to use to just try to suss out or to parse the reasons as to why we're doing this, and it's best to follow convention until you're in a position to truly effectively challenge it without doing too much harm without taking too much of a hit concerning your own capital, whatever it is, whether it's your reputation or your publishing works or your money or whatever. I'm digressing. But anyway, 6 C's, okay? Content, all right, conversation, contribution, creativity, composition, convention. All right, thank you for listening.